Sarah had taken the last subway home countless times. The routine was almost comforting as her evening shift at the hospital ended and she descended the familiar steps into the depths of the underground. The subway was her solitary refuge in the late hours of the night, a steel serpent that carried her home. The station was usually desolate when she arrived, save for the distant echo of a janitor's broom or the forlorn gaze of the automated ticket booth. But this night was different. As the train glided to a halt at the empty station, Sarah felt a peculiar unease tugging at her. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered above her, casting long shadows that danced across the platform. The familiar hum of the subway cars was there, but it seemed to resonate with an eerie emptiness. A chill crawled down her spine as she stepped onto the platform, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Sarah checked her phone. She was right on schedule, and her usual subway car was waiting for her. She was the only passenger, not an uncommon sight for the late-night route. She was about to board when a flicker of movement caught her eye. On the opposite platform, separated by the tracks and a narrow gap, she saw herself, dressed in the same coat, carrying the same bag, waiting for a different train. The other Sarah was almost a mirror image, and yet there was something subtly off about her. Her eyes seemed to gleam with an ominous knowledge, and an eerie smile played on her lips. Panic surged through Sarah as she watched the other version of herself. Her heart raced, and the world seemed to blur around her. The doors of her train began to close, and she lunged forward, barely squeezing through in time. As the subway pulled away from the station, Sarah locked eyes with her doppelganger, who now stood alone on the opposite platform. The other Sarah's smile grew wider, more ominous, and she waved goodbye as the train disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the cold metal pole. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She couldn't shake the feeling of dread, the sight of her own doppelganger smiling across the void. The journey home felt surreal. She had taken the same route 100 times, but now everything had changed. As she exited the subway, the cold night air did little to ease her racing heart. She felt as though the world itself had shifted, that something had fundamentally changed. The memory of her sinister counterpart on the opposite platform haunted her, a reflection that was anything but reassuring. That night, Sarah struggled to sleep. Her mind was consumed by unsettling thoughts, her dreams plagued by visions of the other Sarah, the eerie smile, and the dark, empty subway platform. She awoke in a cold sweat, her apartment feeling like a foreign place devoid of comfort. The next evening, as her shift ended, Sarah hesitated to descend the subway steps. Dread had taken root within her, and she was torn between the familiar routine of her commute and the disconcerting memory of the other platform. She clutched the strap of her bag, her fingers trembling. The subway station appeared the same as always, the same harsh lights, the same hum of the trains. The janitor still pushed his broom in the distance. The ticket booth stood empty. The other platform was deserted, a blank canvas, devoid of any trace of the other Sarah. Sarah boarded her subway car, her pulse quickening as the doors closed behind her. She scanned the faces of her fellow passengers, searching for any sign of familiarity. Everyone seemed ordinary, unremarkable. She told herself it had been a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and stress. But as the subway pulled into the next station, she couldn't help but glance towards the opposite platform. And there, standing beneath the flickering lights, was the other Sarah. Her eyes bore into Sarah's, the same eerie smile playing on her lips. Panic gripped Sarah once more and she stumbled backward in her seat. She couldn't comprehend how this was possible. As the doors of her subway car began to close, the other Sarah waved goodbye, her smile never fading. The last image Sarah saw before the doors sealed her off from the sinister doppelganger was the other Sarah's gaze, filled with an ominous knowledge that sent shivers down her spine. The remainder of her journey home passed in a blur, the world outside the subway car taking on a surreal quality. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of her doppelganger's eyes following her. When she arrived home, she locked the door behind her, her heart pounding. Her apartment felt like a sanctuary, a place of safety from the haunting presence of the other Sarah. But as she settled into bed, the sense of dread persisted. That night, her dreams were filled with visions of the other platform, the sinister smile, and the disconcerting knowledge that her doppelganger existed on the opposite side. She awoke in the early hours of the morning, her mind in turmoil. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's life unraveled. She became obsessed with the idea of her doppelganger, unable to shake the feeling that the other Sarah was watching her, lurking just beyond her field of vision. It didn't matter where she went or what she did. The presence of her sinister counterpart haunted her every moment. One night, as she was walking through a crowded city street, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shop window. It was her, but it wasn't. The eyes that stared back at her were not her own. They were the eyes of the other Sarah, gleaming with an ominous knowledge. Sarah stumbled back, unable to comprehend what was happening. People passed by, oblivious to her distress, their faces blurring into a sea of strangers. She felt as though the world itself had turned against her, that her very identity was slipping away. Pauline had never been to this bus station before. The unforgiving winter's night had descended upon the small, unfamiliar station, leaving her shivering in the frigid air. The station was simple, much like the one she knew so well in her hometown. A bench, a timetable board, and a solitary lamppost that flickered and struggled to illuminate the deserted platform. The only other presence was an old man seated at the far end, huddled beneath a tattered coat, his white beard peeking out. Pauline's phone had run out of battery, leaving her no choice but to wait in the cold silence. She had been visiting a friend and had miscalculated the time, missing her intended bus. Her breath formed misty clouds as she checked her watch, wondering when the next bus would arrive. As she wrapped her scarf more tightly around her neck, the old man shuffled over, his gnarled fingers reaching out toward her. "It's a cold night, isn't it?" he said with a gentle smile, a voice both raspy and kind. Pauline, grateful for the conversation and the warmth the old man's presence offered, nodded. "Yes, it is. Thank you for sharing your coat with me," she replied, noticing the old man's coat, which was far too big for him. The old man draped the oversized coat around her shoulders, and a sense of gratitude washed over her. She inquired about his journey, and he spoke of a lifetime of travels and a love for the road. His stories were like a warm fire in the middle of the cold night, and Pauline found herself captivated. However, as Pauline looked away to check her watch once more, the station seemed to shift and ripple in her peripheral vision. She turned back to the old man, but he was no longer there, and the station itself had transformed. It was as if reality had been hastily erased and redrawn. The lamppost no longer flickered, and the timetable board displayed incomprehensible symbols. The bench had vanished, leaving Pauline standing alone on the platform, engulfed by an eerie, empty world. Fear clutched at her heart. Her breaths grew shallow, and a sense of profound isolation settled in. She looked around, unable to recognize the surreal landscape that had replaced the familiar bus station. The distant sound of the bus engine was replaced by an eerie silence. Pauline's mind raced with fear and confusion. She had no idea how she had arrived in this eerie, vanishing realm, or how she might find her way back to reality. As the chilling realization set in, she was left to navigate the enigma of the vanishing station alone, lost in a world that defied all reason. With each step, she felt as if she were walking through a dream. There was no escape, no point of reference in this strange, featureless expanse. Her voice echoed into the void as she called out, unanswered. The overwhelming sense of being trapped in a surreal nightmare intensified with every step. Pauline questioned her sanity, wondering if she had slipped into the realm of the supernatural, or if her senses had abandoned her. As she walked through the empty world, her mind raced with questions. Had the old man been a guardian of this strange place, or had he unwittingly led her into a realm of pure enigma? She had no answers, only the eerie emptiness and silence that surrounded her. With every passing minute, the world seemed to shift and warp, its very existence uncertain. Reality itself was in flux, and Pauline was a solitary figure adrift in a sea of the unknown. Pauline's steps echoed through the empty world as she walked through the surreal, shifting landscape. The feeling of isolation gnawed at her, as she could no longer see the station she had arrived at, and the old man had vanished without a trace. As she continued her journey, a sense of desolation settled deep within her. The world around her seemed to have lost all connection to reality. The night, once cold and unforgiving, now felt like an eternity of eerie emptiness. Hours, perhaps even days, passed as she walked through the featureless expanse, guided by a sense of direction that was, at best, instinctual. She had no food, no water, and no means to mark the passage of time. Her only companion was her own mounting anxiety, which whispered doubt into her mind. The world itself seemed to defy all logic. She would walk for what felt like miles, only to find herself back in the same spot, as if the world were a tapestry with an ever-shifting pattern. Every landmark was replaced by a surreal, distorted version of itself. Fear and despair threatened to consume her, and she began to question her sanity. Had she fallen into a nightmare or some kind of parallel dimension? There was no escape, no sign of life, no answers to the questions that plagued her. In the midst of her torment, she came across a series of mirrored walls that stretched endlessly in every direction, reflecting her image infinitely. Each reflection showed a different aspect of herself, from elation to despair, as if the mirrors were reflecting not just her physical form, but her emotions and psyche as well. The mirrors seemed to taunt her, revealing a multitude of possible selves, each more fragmented and disturbed than the last. She tried to call out to the reflections, but their voices, distorted and mocking, only added to her distress. Her own tormenting thoughts reverberated through the hall, feeding her growing sense of hopelessness. But she couldn't stop, couldn't rest. The never-ending labyrinth of mirrors seemed to be a cruel trap, and she needed to find a way out. In the final reflection, she saw herself not as she once was, but as a broken, fragmented figure. Her image shattered like glass, and the mirrors around her splintered into 1,000 pieces, revealing a new reality. Pauline stumbled out of the mirror maze and found herself in an altogether different place. She stood at the edge of a vast, dark abyss, with a single narrow bridge leading to an island in the distance. The bridge seemed to hang in the air, defying the laws of physics, as if it were the only connection between her and the enigmatic island. A sense of dread washed over her as she contemplated the treacherous path ahead. The island itself was shrouded in darkness, and there was no discernible destination, only a haunting, palpable void. The old man and the familiar boost station were long gone, replaced by an unfathomable abyss. Paulina took a hesitant step onto the bridge, and it creaked and swayed beneath her weight. She could feel the emptiness below, a void that threatened to consume her. As she made her way across the bridge, the darkness enveloped her, and the only sound was the echoing of her own footsteps. With every step she took, her surroundings shifted and distorted. The island seemed to approach and recede, changing in shape and texture. The very ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if it were an illusion. Pauline's mind reeled with the impossibility of her situation, as if she were trapped in a waking nightmare. Finally, she reached the island, but there was no respite from the surreal emptiness. The island was a barren wasteland, its ground composed of shifting sands that seemed to consume her with each step. The sky overhead was a dark void, devoid of stars or any semblance of light. Pauline was now in the heart of this enigmatic world, surrounded by an eerie stillness that was more terrifying than any noise. She felt as if she were the last person left, in a world that had forgotten time and reason, a place where reality itself had fractured and reformed. Paris, the city of light, was renowned for its enchanting beauty, and on a cool Parisian evening, Michael and Lisa, two adventurous travelers, found themselves exploring its hidden mysteries. The late hour left them alone on an empty subway car, its dim lighting casting an intimate ambiance. The soft hum of the train, the The faint glow of the overhead lights and the rhythmic click-clack of the wheels against the tracks created a soothing backdrop for their journey. Michael, with his adventurous spirit and an insatiable curiosity for the world's mysteries, had been the one to suggest the late-night excursion into the Paris metro. Lisa, his partner in both life and adventure, had eagerly agreed. They had traversed the globe together, seeking out the most enigmatic corners of the world, and Paris was no exception. As the train rumbled through the underground labyrinth, Michael couldn't help but feel an unsettling presence, as if unseen eyes were upon them. He exchanged a puzzled glance with Lisa, their unspoken connection a testament to their growing closeness. Their journey had brought them to some of the world's most mysterious places, and their bond had deepened with each new adventure. Together they gazed around the quiet subway car. The soft, dim light painted an intimate atmosphere, and the two of them sat nestled in a secluded corner. It was then that they noticed it. Strange, shadowy figures beginning to materialize around them. These shadowy entities seemed to emerge from the very fabric of the subway car, their forms flickering and amorphous. Michael leaned in closer to Lisa, his breath catching as he whispered, "Do you see that?" Lisa, equally alarmed, nodded, her eyes locked on the unsettling apparitions. The other passengers on the subway seemed oblivious to the creeping, shadowy figures, absorbed in their own world. Michael couldn't understand how no one else was reacting to this bizarre, eerie presence. Their faces remained shrouded in the inky darkness, but their eyes glowed with an ancient malevolence. The subway car grew chillingly quiet as the ethereal figures closed in. The passengers' voices fell silent, the hum of the train's engine faded into a distant memory, and an uncanny stillness settled over the subway car. "Who are they?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. Michael had no answer, and the inexplicable malevolence radiating from the shadowy figures sent a shiver down his spine. The shadowy entities held an eerie, ethereal presence, their forms flickering and amorphous. Their faces remained shrouded in the inky darkness, but their eyes glowed with an ancient malevolence. They whispered cryptic words in a long-forgotten language, their voices chilling and incomprehensible. Fear gripped Michael and Lisa as they attempted to move away from the approaching shadows. But the ethereal figures closed in, their cold breath sending shivers down their spines. The darkness seemed to envelop them, and the whispered curses grew louder, a chorus of ancient malevolence that resonated with their souls. Desperation gnawed at Michael, and he knew he had to protect Lisa. He reached for her hand, their fingers interlocking as they clung to one another in the face of the growing nightmare. The unspoken bond between them deepened as they faced the inexplicable terrors together. Their love had always been an adventure, but this was unlike anything they had ever encountered. For what felt like an eternity, Michael and Lisa were trapped in a nightmarish world of shadows, their ethereal captors seemingly growing stronger with each passing moment. They clung to each other, finding strength in their shared ordeal. Their love, forged through countless journeys, was now their anchor in a sea of supernatural terror. Their spirits were on the brink of despair when suddenly, the train screeched to a halt. The abrupt stop sent the shadows into a chaotic frenzy, their forms disintegrating like smoke. The subway doors hissed open, and the cold night air rushed in, dispelling the malevolent entities. Michael and Lisa stumbled off the train, trembling and disoriented, but their connection remained unbroken. The echoes of the shadowy figures' whispers still haunted their thoughts, but their shared experience had deepened their bond, leaving them with an indelible scar of a night spent in the depths of the Paris metro. As they stepped onto the subway platform, they clung to one another, their hearts pounding. The night around them felt ordinary once more, the city's bustling energy an almost surreal contrast to the horrors they had just endured. The love that had always been their guiding light had seen them through yet another ordeal.